appreciated. Obviously, if you want to speak, feel free. Emily, Emily's sort of set up this meeting. We are going to record it. Has anybody got a problem with that? It's just to record, the conversations that ARUP and the council can keep a record of some of the more salient points, if that's okay.
I have a problem. I seem to be the wrong way round.
You are, Richard?
Yeah, I'm okay. I mean, I can assure you my laptop is the right way round, but I don't know, I'm not.
An office prank. Right, okay, so for those who don't know me, my name's Adrian Field. I'm the Executive Director at for Cardiff. Thank you for those who've given up their time this afternoon. There are quite a few people, sort of last minute wanting to come on board, which is always a good sign. Please feel free, if you've got a point or a question that you want to raise, if you can use the conversation button, which will be on the horizontal panel. It might be the one that you want to flag up while someone else is talking. So I will monitor those and address those as we go through the session. We do need to finish just before 4 o'clock. So we've got a retail one after this. So we'll try and make it as succinct as possible. What I'm really keen on doing is making sure that the businesses have got a say in, really, I think, in terms of a safe recovery plan, but also flag up any issues or ideas, opportunities, challenges, so others can share in those as well. We did a session this morning on hospitality, which I think went down very well. I want to make it a regular thing, which I'm more than happy to do. It'd be good to get your feedback at the end of this, just to see whether you see the benefit of that as well. If we kick off then, we've got a couple of guys from ARUP. We've got Jamie, I think Ben's with us as well, and Ed, as well as Chris Hansen. ARUP have been commissioned by the council to produce this recovery plan, and they've got a few slides that they want to go through. After that, a bit of an open floor really for businesses to feed on. So Jamie, over to you.
Thanks, Adrian.
Thank you.
Ben, do you want to go first?
Yeah, no, Jamie, I think if you wanted to open a presentation, but just to say, thanks very much for your time. Really looking forward to some of your feedback. I think Jamie's going to take us through the presentation. Any questions that we can.
Okay, we lost you there for a minute, Ben, but I think people got the general gist of it. Just if it's possible, just from extensive experience with Microsoft Teams in the last week or so, if you can mute yourself when you're not talking, it tends to avoid the feedback coming through. But okay, I'll just you've got probably, I don't know, maybe 10 minutes worth of slides to go through. I'll be as quick as I can. I'll apologise if I go through things a bit quickly. But I want to give you as much time as possible to air your thoughts and ask questions. So without any further ado, so the area we're looking at in focus is very familiar to you, I'm sure. It's the city centre. It's indicated by the red line. We are considering things outside of that, but the focus of the study is within that red line boundary. Before we go into the sort of the details and the mechanics of what's being discussed and thought of at the moment, I just want to flag that we are sort of considering this as part of a longer think and a longer term vision. So as you can see, look, this is very, very high level, but we're trying to understand how some of the changes now might lead to a better end state later down the line. So there's two sort of core challenges beyond the obvious one that we've got at the moment. One is around climate resilience and how you actually respond to that. And the second is about sort of an experiential approach. So even before this happened, the need to go to the city centre was starting to get replaced by a want. So you're going to need people to want to go to the city centre in the future. The actual requisite need for going there is going to start to reduce, and we see that through online shopping in a way that working patterns are changing. So the first thought was around this idea of a sort of a circular loop within the city. So creating a loop, it's there in parts at the moment, but not in sort of completeness, and then overlaying sort of different considerations. So looking at how we can start to integrate more open space into the city centre, which also helps with flood management, habitat creation, shifting towards more walking and cycling and cleaner air policies. And I think critically, particularly from your perspective, it's about, as I've touched on, improving that city centre experience. So, why would you go to Cardiff? What is setting this apart from other cities? So just hold that thought for a second as we go through some of the detail. So we're mapping the work out on a sort of hierarchical basis. So we're quite lucky in Cardiff because it's built almost on sort of concentric rings. So if we go from the inside out, you've got the covered sort of shopping areas as you're familiar with no cars. We've then got the pedestrianised streets as we move a bit further out, which is where a lot of our focus work is. The next layer out, which is where we've got the sort of public transport loop. We're proposing more sort of pedestrian priority streets, so lower vehicle speeds, wider pavements, and then beyond that, you've got the existing road structure. So within the pedestrianised areas and the main shopping precincts, what we're looking at the moment, and I would just make the point again that these are ideas, these are not fixed designs at this stage, and you're all part of the process of shaping these proposals. But what we're looking at is a one-way system. So, I mean, hopefully it's relatively self-explanatory on the diagram, but we've got sort of gateway or entry points, which we'll look at in a second, that mark the entrance to the city, a series of one-way loops, and then these little circles represent what we're calling leapfrog points. So that's where, you know, if you're walking at one direction up St Mary Street, it allows you to turn back and cut back on yourself. And not forgetting, sorry, one last point, obviously there's likely to be a bigger drive towards bike usage, so we're just cognizant of that by allowing sort of sufficient and generous space for safe bike parking on the outside of the city centre itself. So the first point is, you know, think about this almost like sort of the doorstep to the city. So what's the first thing you experience when you arrive? So we think it's really important to have that sort of welcoming point, as we're calling it at the moment. There isn't a prescriptive sort of list of what that might be just yet, but in principle, what we're thinking is, you know, this is where you would have what we're calling almost like ambassadors, that people sort of direct you, let you know what's happening. You might have what we're calling a clean station. So is it sort of a foot operated hand sanitizer? So you're assuring people as they're coming in that, you know, there is sanitation at hand. People are taking it seriously. So again, confidence is slowly starting to come back. It might include some of the bike parking that I've talked about, and then just to sort of really lift the sort of the general quality of the place, temporary installations. So you look at the way that, example, big events are managed, how wayfinding is used, how temporary landscape and art is used. So specifically then, if we look at Queen Street, this is what the one-way system might look like in a bit more detail. So you'll see that there's 4 meters kept either side. That's to allow two people, you know, if somebody's walking slowly, somebody can walk past them and still keeping sufficient distance. There's 2 meters allowed for queuing outside the shops with a buffer zone to stop any overlap. And then a space in the middle that can be used for various things. It may be that it's spill out from some of the restaurants, or it could be used for some of the sort of temporary landscapes and installations that I'd mentioned in the previous slide. So look, very, very loose, quick sketch work, just to give you an idea of how that pans out in 3 dimensions. So you can see the sort of the one-way system, how the buffer zone works and where the queuing areas work. This is one of the leapfrog points. So again, I won't dwell on this for too long, but hopefully the concept is clear enough that if you're walking up, you can turn and change direction. So very similar sort of concept for St Mary Street, again, where you've got clear segregation. And I think what's really important about this is that this is all very intuitive. If we create something that's too complex, people are going to find it really hard to follow. So simplicity has got to reign supreme. And again, just to give you an idea of what could happen on the Hayes. So the Hayes as was on a lovely day last summer, and then if we start to reconfigure how it may be used, don't take the colours literally. We're not talking about respraying the Hayes, as nice as it might look. So this is just to explain the concept. Again, you can start to see how the segregation is managed. And I'll just finish quickly, and apologies, I appreciate I've rifled through that, but I just wanted you to see a sort of visual map. You can see where we are at the moment. This is very much about very quick measures to allow the city to function. So they might not be the prettiest in the first state, but we're very, very mindful that we need to create this welcoming atmosphere. And as we move through time from where we are at the moment to some sort of normality and recovery stage, that we're building towards a positive outlook for the city. So I think that's the slides that I think I'll talk through today, and I'll hand back over to Adrian. I think it's we'll take questions and comments if that's okay.
Thanks, Jamie. Appreciate that. Yeah, joined by numerous different types of hospitality businesses. So we've got reps from pubs, coffee shops, hotels, theatres as well. Just be interested in any initial thoughts on that and the impact for you as a business, you as an industry at all, please, just to sort of open things up, I guess.
Adrian, hi, it's Richard, Holiday Inn.
Hi, Richard.
Hi, I've turned my camera off to save the mirth of all the participants. So, I guess what we've articulated is it's obviously pretty radical, but I think we're going to have to experience what volumes are like anyway. So there's going to be a whole lot of new way of doing everything, both inside and outside your businesses, and nobody knows what sort of volumes are going to be yet. So I think in principle what's been outlaid, it looks viable from my point of view. I think people will need guiding in this sort of way throughout a city. So then when they go into a building and there's individual buildings are following guidelines, it becomes a joined up thing. People are acting the same way in buildings, public buildings, as they are outside and with whatever restrictions and are placed upon those individual businesses, be it a theatre, a cafe, or whatever it might be.
No, totally agree. I think what we've got to do is make sure there's a reassurance to encourage people back into the city centre, whether that's workers, shoppers, visitors, that they know that an area is clean, it's been well managed, and is navigable, I suppose. And I think one of the things ARUP you've been keen on is ensuring there's consistency in the plans as well, but also factoring any sort of local constraints, I suppose, whether that's physical constraints as well.
Yeah, that's right, Adrian. I think, again, maybe if I just explain where this is all at in terms of the process. Clearly it's early, but this has been developed very, very rapidly. So the approach is to take an overarching view, get that consistency, get a sort of an agreed strategy, and then what will happen after that is that there will no doubt be detail worked out on different streets. And the other thing I would emphasise is that this is going to be live, is in the sense that this project and this strategy is going to evolve continually over the coming months. So what is laid down in the first couple of weeks may be very different to what is there in 4 to 5 months, because everybody is learning as this is going on. So we're sort of tapped into a global network, fortunately, where we're able to draw on best practice from other places. But even with all of that, you've still got to actualise this in the locality. So that's, again, just to reinforce the point, that's where your input is absolutely critical.
Yeah, and that's why we've had these sessions, just to make sure, I think people, the businesses, the people at the coalface buy into any sort of recovery plan and can continue to do so as well. I don't know if anyone from sort of the pubs, Nick, Andy, wants to sort of come in and flag up any observations from your members, your sector.
Well, Adrian, a question first, and sorry, I forgot that I was on mute. Can you hear me now, all right?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's a technical question, really, in terms of what we've just seen there. Is this something that's envisaged as being voluntary or a suggestion, or is it something that's going to be policed within the city centre?
I can probably answer that one as an example. It's a really good question. I think what we're observing here, across the globe with the different measures is that when you've got a low number of people within a city centre, is that people are doing their own, if you like, movements and the like. As we're seeing cities increase in terms of the numbers of people, we're seeing people comply to social norms. So I think the idea is Cardiff's a very welcoming city, it's pedestrianised, it's very friendly, it's easy to get around, and we're just trying to do that in the same way. And part of what we've showed so far is that there's no major barriers. It's just to be a suggestion, and the psychology behind it is that, if we were in the Hague together in a crowd, is that we would want to be seen to be acting responsibly and in good faith and behaving well. There will be people that don't, and I think that is an element that's still being worked through with the council and others, just to figure out, well, if you do get those who perhaps cause an issue, how is that dealt with? But by and large, I think most people have responded pretty well to these suggestions around the world.
Well, I agree with what you've just said there about the fact that we've seen that the majority of people comply for the public good as well as for their own benefit. So thanks for that answer. And I think then further to what Richard from Holiday Inn was saying, I think and I would hope that what we're starting to see here will be a blueprint that can get rolled out within premises, because within premises, and we've already started having these conversations, we're going to have to come up with some kind of similar schemes, really, and I suppose journey plans through the building, for want of a better way of putting it. But yeah, that's all from me for now, Adrian. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Nick. I think what we've got to do is make sure that any plans that individual businesses have got are aware of what's going on the public realm as well, really. And I know there's been a bit of talk about whether there's an opportunity for those in the hospitality industry to potentially extend the number of covers they've got and the boundaries in front of their properties. And I'm guessing there's people here from licensing and just practically whether that's an option or not. You've got a whole raft of things to consider there. But in terms of the licensing process, if that's a viable option to help keep the business open, but also observe social distancing, is that something that is feasible at all, I guess? So maybe a bit of talk about down by Central Library, whether there's room there, St Mary Street, possible ability to extend the number of covers outside premises there as well. Those kind of things that impact your business, but also the public realm and the plans that ARUP are putting together on behalf of the council. I don't know if anyone, I know Tom, 200 Degrees, you're involved, you're in on the call as well. Anyone else who might be considering that or wanting to look at that?
My name is Matthew Phipps. I'm a solicitor act for some licensees in the city centre, and lots of them will be very keen to make sure that the space outside the front of their premises offers them a commercial opportunity, and the plans that look excellent in terms of the pedestrianisation point will need to think about the area immediately outside the front, I suspect, and effectively divert around them. If you think of the sort of outdoor terrace spaces that we've got in the city centre that accommodate currently, say, 40 chairs and 20 tables, with social distancing, they may only be able to accommodate 10 or 12 chairs or tables. And the same is going to be true potentially for the inside of premises. So you'd presume for the businesses to be commercially viable that those outside spaces are going to want to be enlarged. So in terms of the sort of routing for pedestrianisation, I think that's something to factor in. If you look at, say, the Queen Street plan that you put up earlier, the front of the McDonald's just further down on the right is going to, well, presumably is going to be something that would be a congestion point if the pedestrian element was to go past in reasonable proximity to the front. Even if it's 2, 3, 4 meters, there's going to be lots of people around there, I'd have thought.
I mean, sorry to jump in again, Adrian. For my part, and I think I could speak for most of the businesses in this sense. Yes, we'd like to maximise any outside space, and as Matthew Phipps just said, social distancing might mean that actually the same space is dividing our occupancy in half. So I think, as I said earlier in the week, a very quick point here, where I think outside areas can be extended, I'd like to see council and police licensing taking that on board and working with the businesses, as quickly and as fleet-footedly as possible. Sorry to use that clumsy term. Because every little bit is going to count. Every little bit is going to make a difference, notwithstanding, obviously, again, what Matthew just said, where you've got licensed premises within that sort of track of people being guided around town, you're going to have to accommodate for that as well. So all I'm saying is, where we can make adjustments and perhaps increase outside spaces, can we please make sure we can do it as quickly as possible?
Thanks, Nick. Are there any thoughts from, I don't know, Justin, sort of the police or guys from ARUP in terms of have you factored those things in? So you've got the eastern end of Queen Street, you've got quite a few tables and chairs that are immediately outside the premises. You've also got the need for emergency access delivery vehicles between certain times as well. What sort of how much has that been factored in? Perhaps if we ask ARUP that, and then perhaps Justin and others, if they want to talk about the licensing implications of whether these sorts of things are feasible.
Yeah, I'm happy to answer some of that has started to come into thinking, and I think we've definitely recognised the importance of those uses within the city. And I think one of the areas we are exploring is what other areas and what other uses are there available, just being creative with that space. So, within the sort of central areas of a lot of these streets, there is street furniture, there's something that can be done to reconfigure some of those areas. And in terms of kind of what we've shown there on the screen is kind of a standard cross-section point, but what we recognise is as you move up and down, there are certain restrictions. So, to the sort of the eastern end, you've got the fairground, restriction area. Might that be something that might need to be removed? Then you've obviously got further down the cafe sort of area. How's that handled? So there are slightly different, what we call like typologies needed to respond to that. But I think we've got some really good creative thinking about that additional space, and that will be worked through over the next couple of weeks. So we've seen in other cities there's been some really good use of technology, the digital order platforms, to kind of use spaces that are perhaps not immediately adjacent to premises, but are just a little bit further away, and they're kind of a congregation of businesses might serve that space in something that's a little bit different to the norm.
Thanks, Ben. Justin, any thoughts in terms of whether a change in footprint might, be easily or managed at all from a licensing point of view from the police?
We take that as a no then.
Justin's on. Justin, can you hear me? You're on mute at the moment.
Yeah, hi there. Chief Inspector Michelle Conker. I work with Justin, I'm part of the licensing team. Can you hear me?
Someone's trying to talk. No. Okay. Okay.
Sorry, we could hear you, but you were very quiet. You were as if you were really far away from the microphone. Can you turn any?
Is that any better?
That's a bit better. Yeah.
Right. Okay. I'm not sure Justin must be having the same problems. I can see he's online, but he's not answering. So, yeah, I suppose I can speak for police licensing. We're obviously keen to support the businesses getting back to normal the new normal as quick as possible. We'll certainly work very closely with local authority and businesses to do what we can, and you won't find us delaying anything unnecessarily.
What's your name? Sorry.
It's Michelle Conker. I'm the Chief Inspector.
Okay. Thank you.
So I suppose from our perspective, yeah, we'll certainly want to work very closely with you and get those things moving as quickly as possible. There's a couple of concerns I would have. Obviously, as you know, we don't govern the outside space. That is governed by the local authority. So we'd be keen to know that you've shared the plans with them. I know that ARUP have been commissioned by local authority, but they would obviously have the final say on that outside space, and we would work with them, fire service. And just considering those emergency plans and evacuation plans, etc., the sooner those things are done, the quicker we can agree everything, I suppose, would be the ask. And then one final consideration from me really would be, have you kind of considered the impact that the homeless community will have on these plans? As you know, we've got a pretty large homeless community, currently all accommodated. But I would say that when businesses and nighttime economies start back up again in the city, that you're going to see the homeless community move straight back into the city, and the impact they will have on the current plans for a one-way system, not quite so easy to implement or enforce, I would suggest.
Jason Dixon here from Cardiff Council, Operational Manager. I'm just let you know that in terms of homeless people on the street, that will be dealt with separately by another team under Sarah McGill, Director.
Yeah, I'm aware of that. I sit in the same meetings with Sarah. What I'm asking is, have ARUP considered the homeless community when coming up with this plan?
Yeah, great, thank you. Yeah.
Adrian, another quick point, if I may, just for the Chief Inspector there, and I think perhaps a recognition that when this idea was put forward to me about extra outside space, I thought and do think a great idea. I don't think anybody should imagine that these are going to be great money-making spaces for any of the businesses. It's more really an extra signal as part of this process of making the streets one way and whatever else we do. It's really more part of a signal to customers that we're back open and we're taking every consideration very, very seriously.
Yeah, I think it'd be useful to see, you know, before a lot of effort is put into all of these plans to potentially extend the footprint, you know, is there actually a desire for businesses to do so? I think that, you know, whether that's something that Nick, you want to check with sort of forum members, we can do through For Cardiff, if that's sort of for, you know, the cafes and, you know, the daytime businesses as well, just to get a bit of a feel for that really, and just almost to see what possible options are, because there's going to be some areas, to Church Street, for example, where that's just not possible at all along there, because it's just so narrow anyway. Just a question that's coming from my colleague Emily. Has there been any decisions yet on the removal of smaller items of street furniture, the movable flagpoles, for instance, or some advertising sites? I know the carousel on Queen Street is going or is gone, and some benches. Elaine, do you want to come in on that and explain who you are? Elaine, can you hear me? Okay, we'll come back to that one. I think.
Can I just, sorry, before obviously that had been my question, but I thought the Chief Inspector's question about whether or not the homeless community had been considered was left unanswered.
They will be considered, yes, they will be considered. All I'm saying is that the matter of managing homeless and how they, what they do in the city centre, that will be dealt with separately by Sarah McGill and her team.
I appreciate that. I meant, sorry, more the question originally that had been asked was about how they'd been considered into the plan that ARUP have presented. So
yes, it needs to be included in the plans, yes, and consideration of where they might be sitting or placing and how it might interact with any queuing, so you avoid that sort of interaction, yes.
And in terms of the policing of social distancing and liabilities, what's the, be interesting to get the views of the police on this. So if someone's blatantly not practicing social distancing, is that something the police can move people on, including the homeless?
So I can answer that, as Michelle can't hear me. At the moment, the homeless community don't fall within the legislation, so that's why I asked the question, and I'm grateful to Emily for being tenacious with that, really. I think there's probably some further work that needs to be done, because they won't comply with the regulations, which will cause issues around the queuing. It'll cause issues for policing the city centre. As you can imagine, we're already under tremendous pressure trying to police the regulations. It's sort of doubled our demand really on a daily basis. So I'd be really interested to have some higher level discussions around these plans, and I'll be flagging it up to Wendy Gunny, who's the Chief Superintendent at the moment.
Okay, that's great. I'm just interested from the hotel perspective. We've got Karen Matthews from the Hoteliers Association. Karen, are you getting any sort of feedback from your members about issues that have or are affecting the hotel industries in terms of being closed or access, you know, potential use of car parks, for example, that are currently empty because the hotels are closed as a means of increasing car parking capacity in the city centre?
It's not something that's been raised by any of our members at the moment. The vast number of hotels are closed currently, but nothing's been raised about the car parking situation or anything like that. But that was one of my things that I wrote down actually. How's all this going to factor in with the car parks as well? Because obviously it's quite a big issue for the city with people coming in. It's quite a big issue for the city coming in.
Okay. Can I just remind people, if you're not on, if you're not speaking, if you can mute yourselves, that'd be great. If you're not speaking, if you mute yourselves, that'd be great. Thank you. Yeah, in terms of the car parking, ARUP colleagues, is there anything you wanted to sort of flag up on that? Transport was an issue that came up in the session we did this morning with the offices and educational sector about workers and visitors. And their means of getting in and out, and then sort of car parking as well as people try and avoid public transport.
Yeah, I think the comment this morning, point well made. I think people coming into the city centre will need to use a variety of modes, and I think the important part of that is there's individual choice about what people feel comfortable with. So, Transport for Wales are working on the rail and how that works at Cathay, Queen Street and Central. There are some measures in place for any of you who might have travelled through Central in the last few days, and I think they will then be increased as time goes on. So the council is working to understand that and work with that. Same for bus, but more broadly, there is an opportunity. Cycling is seen as a way that provides that social distancing. But in doing so, what we try to do is to provide two things really. One is the ability to make that journey by providing some temporary cycleways that feed the city, but also other parts of the city centre. And then to provide the ability for that cycle parking to take place. And we, on an earlier slide, we annotated where some of those could be, and we're working through if that's appropriate and that would work. In terms of car parks, now some of the car parks are owned and operated privately. And for some of those, they need to make a decision because the constraint point for car parks is the ability to safely social distance as you're coming in and out of either lifts or stairs. And at the same time, I think it was talked about earlier, the kind of evacuation procedures around certain locations that link to that, and car parks is kind of one of those in terms of the spacing. So working with individual operators, some are limiting their spaces anyway. So what the council is looking at is, for example, some of the surface car parking that surrounds the city. Some of that is working as a car park now, and some of it might be within private ownership to try and establish these locations and advertise them a bit more openly for people, so that those who need to drive can what we call walk and stride and walk through from their parking space. But we also expect that some people will choose not to travel to the city, and these are all personal choices. And I think the council needs to provide that range of opportunities, which includes the use of the primary cycle routes, and I think there are some temporary cycle routes which will be provided to facilitate that.
Okay, thanks, Ben. Justin's flagged up, I think he's got issues with audio in terms of the enlarged outside areas, how premises will comply with their premises licensing conditions regarding CCTV coverage and monitor these larger areas. I think that's probably one that needs to be considered on a case-by-case basis, I guess. I don't know if anyone else has got any thoughts on that at all.
Yeah, as I said, Adrian, it's yeah, of course, Justin's right to flag those things up, and he would. This is actually what I meant by referring to, instead of regarding these spaces as necessarily money-making opportunities for the businesses, because I emphasize again, that's not what it is. It's really about whether it forms a part of the strategy of reopening the city centre and welcoming people back to the city centre and being able to flag up what it is that we can do. Now, in terms of, we don't need to go into technical detail in this sort of meeting about what CCTV coverage there would be for, let's say that there was an area split between 4 premises, you know, surely we're not going to say, well, all 4 CCTV systems would have to be enhanced for each particular business, because obviously there are other CCTV facilities around. But as I say, I don't think it's helpful for us to get involved in the detail of that. It's exactly what I meant, though, about licensing authorities and others thinking on their feet about these sorts of things and helping the businesses.
Adrian, can I come in there? It's Richard Holiday Inn.
Of course you can.
Yeah, just the next point, really. I agree. I think for a lot of businesses, in different which ways, not just the hospitality sector. It's about survival, really, and even on reopening, it's about survival of businesses. So every person who has a vested interest on every which way, and all the people on this call and beyond, will really need to sort of join up to ensure that if businesses are to survive, which they need to do, because then the city centre can survive. Because if they don't, we won't really have a traffic, pedestrian traffic problem in the city centre, because nobody will be in there. In my view, you know, we really need to think about the survival aspect of businesses as well, and how they're going to do that. Because at the moment, there's some very, very stark messages that we're looking at, really, on how we face things.
Yeah, thanks, Richard. Yeah, I think there's a need to be agile and think of ideas, and I think that's one of the reasons for this session, really, is to, you know, what within the industry that you work in, or you've seen elsewhere, whether that's in the UK or abroad, is something that might be up for consideration, that could be part of these plans moving forward, and, you know, use it as an opportunity for Cardiff and for your individual businesses. So, you know, the thing about hotel car parking, you know, if those car parking spaces are empty at the moment, they're not being used, is there a small income opportunity there? Does that sort of go against what the council and ARUP are trying to do to generally reduce car parking, or does it help in the short term until things get back and, you know, the hotel welcomes their own guests when they open again? I don't know if Karen or Alison have got any views on that.
Sorry, there's not a huge amount of hotel car parking space within Cardiff. Within the city centre, parking spaces are quite limited, and I know of the ones that are open at the moment. Myself, for example, we are finding our car park is busy with the key workers that we're currently having in. But it's certainly something that we can put out to the members and see if there is an opportunity for anybody that's not operating just now.
Just to that point, Karen, Adrian, I think many of the other car parks at the moment use automatic number plate recognition systems.
Yeah.
To help sort of manage and police their car parks from abuse. And these are all linked in now with third-party operators such as yourparkingspace.com. So it's quite common now for people coming into the city to pre-book their parking space anyway, and they'll look at where available parking is. So I think one of the thoughts that could be taken out of this is to sort of encourage any of those participants that have car parks, such as ours, that do use ANPR. They can then link in with a third-party operator, and your sort of car parking is managed by a demand basis then online, which would be helpful to everybody. The revenue systems are all done automatically, etc., and people can set their own pricing. It works pretty well, to be honest.
Okay, Ryan Williams from the council has asked something we talked about a little bit before as well. Is there any consideration to facilitate the Deliveroo, Uber Eats rider cycles with increased demand at key locations? They tend to, or like to, gather in clusters. Linked to that, I suppose, are smoking areas for those who are part of any pubs or bars or cafes, whether that needs factoring in. And then a question from Andy, some potential perhaps to extend the road closure measures used for match days or events at the Principality, or Cardiff After Dark, Westgate Street, perhaps to enhance the cycle routes. Are there opportunities to bring forward some of the planned clean air measures, I suppose, isn't it, in terms of road closures, and also any thoughts being given in the plan to smoking areas and then the increased number of delivery drivers?
So, Adrian, there's a couple of questions now. If I answer the first, if that's all right, which is around the delivery riders. Is there a defined position at the moment? No, is the short answer. Have we considered it? Yes. So there's a couple of things that we need to take on board. I mean, at the moment, you're not meant to ride a bike along Queen Street, full stop. St Mary Street is a slightly different issue, but what we're going to need to get into in the next sort of level of detail is understanding which outlets have alternative means of supplying the riders, i.e. do they have to come through the front door, and if we are going to have almost like sort of muster points, where would those be located? But we've got quite a dense network of streets within the city centre, that there will be a way of resolving this. I think trying to manage people on bikes within the one-way pedestrian system is going to be complicated, would be my short answer to that. And I think with the other questions, I think I've got Ed Whitney, who's one of my colleagues from ARUP, might be better placed to answer some of those other questions. I think Ed's on the call.
Ed, or just Ben still here? Is there any thought on being put into regarding the road closures that are often used for events?
There will be a number of, I suppose, cycle improvements or temporary cycle improvements, pop-up lanes around the city centre. Obviously, the mechanism for the internal centre itself is still being worked on due to the complexity of the pedestrians and the mix and match of people. Immediately, I suppose next week probably, there'll be an extra lane on Castle Street dedicated to cycles by taking out a lane of traffic, and then soon there'll be a lane taken out on Wood Street as well in the next week or so, as a temporary immediate measures to try and improve the access to cycles from that part of the city.
Hi, it's Ed Whitney here. Sorry, I had a problem with my headset there for a moment. Just to speak about the road closures and traffic restrictions point. One of the things we recognise when we talk about this subject, we're not always precise. There are different degrees of restricting streets to traffic, and clearly there are a lot of movements that businesses rely on, such as servicing and deliveries, and in more difficult times, emergency services access, and then of course there's the public bus and cycling. So I think across the city centre we recognise that getting enabling car parking is really important, but that the private car is the vehicle to start with in terms of removing that level of that type of traffic out of the city centre. But we would always seek to retain, where necessary, servicing access, enabling businesses to continue to function. So blanket road closures are going to be a lot less common than that sort of more nuanced, certainly in our conception, than that sort of more nuanced approach to restricting movements.
Has there been any thought about changing delivery times or restrictions into some of the pedestrianised areas at all?
Well, I think we recognise that there would be some considerable benefits to separating out the times when people want to move around the city centre from those times when service vehicles are in the city centre, and a lot of cities at the moment, and a lot of their advisors will talk to you about freight consolidation. Now that is a complicated thing to introduce, and it's not a short term or easy thing to do. In the shorter term, the council could explore encouraging or setting out that deliveries could take place earlier rather than at the times they do now. But nothing has been proposed that is concrete, and I'd like to hear from the group actually what kind of challenges would that introduce to your businesses if servicing timings were to change to be slightly earlier, for example. And I ask that as an open question rather than as a proposal to test.
Hi Ed, it's Richard from Holiday Inn.
Hello.
Yeah, the one challenge I potentially see with that, you can go earlier and restrict time slots, but then you often have several key suppliers that will supply all or the majority of our sector. So yeah, these guys can't hit. They've got to step and stage their deliveries throughout a large time span, because they're not. It's not lots of little individual companies coming in. It is in some cases, but you'll find a lot will have challenges with that, because they'll need to be at 3 or 4 places at once within a certain time span, and that won't be feasible. So that might throw some challenges there. I know we've had that on particularly on match days where roads have been closed, and we've had linen deliveries in and had to manage those deliveries at certain times because of the road closures and so on and so forth. And these people have had challenges because they've had to be in other places to deliver linen at other hotels and places in the city. So that's one thing that you might get thrown up with that regard.
Yeah, the thing about the loading and servicing movements is they are always a very complicated thing to try and unravel or indeed reset. So I don't envisage that any proposal would be generated lightly and without far more consultation than is happening right now. Similarly, introducing measures in terms of servicing timing, it's always, I think, sensible to do it on an experimental basis, which is a fun sounding word, but essentially it means you try out the new arrangement and see how it works for a week or a few days, with a view to then changing and managing that flexibly. I think flexibility and I think the word agile came up earlier, is really important, and there's no reason why you couldn't take that mindset into servicing and delivery timing as well.
Well, with that said, Matt Phipps has sort of said that many premises have restrictions on their premises licensing prohibiting early morning deliveries as well, so that needs to be borne in mind. Just conscious of time, Nigel Williams on the chat, Nigel's from the National Museum of Wales, has said, what assumptions have been made in the recovery planning about the amount of people who will be allowed to gather in spaces, and what weather provision is being considered? I know the shopping centres were concerned about that, because when it rains they tend to have an influx of people who come in from outside. And then a very quick one from Stuart, South Wales Police. Does this allow for emergency vehicle access along Queen Street? I'm guessing that the plans do. If one of you wants to take the 2 questions there, please.
I'll tell you what, if I take the first question, if that's okay, on assumptions in terms of numbers, there's multiple answers to this. So I think the first thing is hopefully give some reassurance. We are now engaged with Public Health Wales, so there is a clear line of communication with certainly within where national guidance is coming from. So without wishing to paraphrase the politicians, we will be led by the science to some degree on that. There's a slightly more complicated answer in terms of what the capacity would be within the street, which I will perhaps ask Ed to touch on in terms of some of the modelling work that will follow later down the line. But really, at this stage, we can't give an absolute figure. I think is the truthful answer. That will come out as this process develops very, very rapidly over the coming weeks.
Yeah. So to pick up that point around capacity and modelling, there is a well understood methodology to calculate what the capacity of a space is given different behaviours, and that is work that we recommend is undertaken as soon as possible, and is repeated as people's behaviours change. So the capacity of a space, obviously, if people are social distancing, will be different to if they're not. It depends on how long people want to stay in the city centre. It depends on how many shops people go into and so forth. So there are factors that we understand. So for example, the social distancing measure is clear, but then how will people's behaviour change when they're in the city centre, and what directions will they want to walk in, and so on, are things that we'll need to monitor as we go. So one of the things we're really clear about is the need to collect information and then calculate and re-estimate and redesign some of these spaces. I say design, it sounds like a really significant exercise, but what I mean is, certain footway areas could be widened given certain circumstances, and then a month or so hence they could be widened further, for example. That kind of being alive to changes in capacity requirements. So yeah, there is a very clear plan for us to do that. When at the moment, for day one and for week one of these measures being in place, we feel the sensible thing to do is to start with a light touch approach and then be able to model that as we go forwards. I think there's the second comment which I could pick up was emergency vehicle access. Yeah, absolutely. Now, obviously, it's more than ever, access for emergency services vehicles is really important. And I don't know of many traffic regulation orders which do prohibit access from those vehicles, and certainly any layouts we produce in the coming days and weeks will have undertaken all the swept path analysis to ensure that you have enough room physically, as well, leaving aside the legal aspect of it, for vehicles to have that access.
Okay, thanks, Ed. I think in terms of the businesses themselves, it'd be interesting to just get some very quick views, or to let me know in terms of businesses' own requirements in terms of guidance, risk assessments. The session we did this morning, I think it was businesses felt it'd be really good if For Cardiff maybe led on having an area on their website that other people can access each other's risk assessments on various situations from within your own premises, to save everybody having to rewrite it. Now, I appreciate some of you will work for larger groups and that will already be covered. But it'd be interesting to perhaps get any people's views on whether they see that as a benefit to help them, for us to sort of provide updates on latest guidance from that's coming out of Welsh Government, central government as well. If you could perhaps let me know separately, conscious of time. In terms of your reporting, ARUP, have you had a deadline by which you have to produce the report to the council?
Sorry, Dad, I thought you were going to talk, but I'll answer. There's not really a direct answer, unfortunately. So there are clearly certain key meetings that will take place in the council over the coming weeks. But I also appreciate everybody's probably chomping at the bit to get a definite answer here. There isn't really a fixed date as it stands, but clearly this is going to be expedited over the next couple of weeks to come to a resolution for the initial phases.
Yeah,
Well,
so
yeah, Jason Dixon here. I'll just add to that this will be an iterative process. We will take all this fantastic, useful information and feed that back into other areas with ARUP, with the police, with our resilience team, emergency planning team, with the events team, with our designers, and we will bring all that together with St David's shopping centre, with the plans that they are developing, and we will set up some protocols, and we'll share that information. We'll come back with you with this information so that we get to a position where we come to some agreement on a starting point to work forward with. And as Ed has been saying, this isn't going to be a fixed scenario from the get-go. It will be something that we will modify as needed, as we see fit, depending on how the space is used. And that's the big unknown that was being mentioned earlier by Richard and others. So just set that stall out. Okay.
Great, thanks, Jason. Okay, I think we're at the end there. If just very quickly, I don't know whether those who are responsible for those running hospitality venues can perhaps do a bit of an indication as to whether you think this would be a useful session to do on maybe a weekly basis, fortnightly basis, just to keep everyone abreast of what's going on, keep the comms links up as well. If you don't want to sort of let me know now, if you can sort of perhaps indicate separately to myself or colleagues, that would be useful. Because I think, you know, as the guys have said, this is an evolving situation. I think it's useful for businesses to have that input into plans, what's working well, what isn't as well. Because, you know, we've touched on a lot of things in the last hour that we can sort of take out from this, and, you know, things will change, such as, you know, the homeless, dealing with what was an issue before all this. You know, will that become more of a problem in terms of social distancing and supporting businesses? The cycle parking for staff, colleagues, many in the hospitality industry, you know, in terms of getting home late at night, there's issues there, I think, as well. The challenges about deliveries and whether there's any flexibility. You know, again, Matthew's flagged up the bit about whether there's any flex in terms of enforceability of issues as well. Regarding earlier delivery vehicles, and obviously the need to modify and change the plans as well, really. So has anybody got any sort of final comments they want to make at all? Okay, thank you for that. Appreciate everybody's time. I know an hour doesn't do it justice, but we have to stop somewhere. If anybody does have any sort of follow-up comments they want to make, I'm more than happy to receive those, pass those on to the guys at ARUP and Cardiff Council as well. But I really appreciate your time, and yeah, if you can let me have your thoughts as to whether you want to do something more regularly as part of this session, either for all businesses or just for this sector, please let me know. Otherwise, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Cheers.
Right, I can't do this, so.
Thanks, Adrian.
They connected me, but he can't hear. She could hear me in the beginning.
There's that one still going on. This is a new one now.
It should be a new one at 4.
Well, it was on a different link, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Go to your email.
Why they keep deleting these and they keep popping up? I haven't learned how to work this thing properly yet. So we'll see. At 4 o'clock. No, it's 10 a.m. Four. Because I spoke to Emily initially and she could hear me.
There's no invitation here.
All right, leave it. I'm just going to email him. Leave it, Steve. Just leave it. Don't worry. I have to get a lead, Steve. I have to get this thing working. Will you help me or not?
Yeah, I can try. I've ordered two cables. They won't arrive till tomorrow.
All right. Well, you can go in on. Well, we can go in tomorrow morning,
I don't know when they're going to arrive.
or I can go in on Monday morning.
He hasn't sent you an invitation.
That's all right. Don't worry about it.
Anyway, there can't be a meeting going on.
Well, there was at 4. He said there's another one at 4.
No invitation.
All right. And emails. Perhaps he just forgot to attach it to me. Anyway, to be honest with you, this is quite blue sky thinking from Europe as well. You know, they're doing a consultancy. So, and obviously measures, they've got all these ideas that they want to implement, which are obviously really, I think what they should be doing is thinking about initially what you need to do initially in the next couple of weeks when we start getting people coming in, not longer term, because these things are going to, I mean, they'll be fluid. They're looking for to go for months and months. But one of the things they didn't, were they looking to use the spaces and bring move sort of the space in the middle of Queen Street and other areas to promote that businesses are open. But I've got activity sites on all those streets.
Yeah, well, you should tell
And nobody's mentioned activity sites. Now, I'm a little bit concerned about that because I don't want to appear selfish. Because I'm been trying to make money, but I already have had some inquiries for a few months' time. But I mean, this is about businesses trying to survive.
Yeah.
So I don't want to then go to them and say, well, what about my activity sites? It's only council money. So I didn't mention it on that front because I think I need to. I think I'll mention it to Adrian, but I'm also going to mention it to Neil and just say, how is this?
But it's worth sending you an email.
I am going to
say there's no attachment.